Hello, I'm W.T. Edmondson and welcome to Focus. Freedom often causes unbelievable silence. Well, the summer is up on us and there are those that are out to play and those that are still working. But the young lady that we are about to interview, she's busy working for the common good. Our guest today is the Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman, and she's an organizer for Faith Voices for Jefferson City. She's also the pastor of Table of Grace Church here in Jefferson City. Welcome to Focus.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about who is Michelle?
Oh, there are many facets to that. So I grew up around here. I grew up in New Bloomfield, just across the river, and spent all of my years there playing basketball and doing all the things that a person does in school. Went to Lincoln University for a short time, and then found my place at Central Missouri State University, where I graduated with a degree in business with an emphasis in accounting. Came back here to Jefferson City and spent some time in the business community, owned a local business for a while, and sensed this tug that God continued to pull on my heart and my mind and let me know that there was something else that I was supposed to be doing with my life. So I took off to seminary, and while I was in seminary, I felt called to come back here and to start a new congregation here in Jefferson City for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And so we started Table of Grace. So my family started that church about 3 years ago, and so I'm the pastor of Table of Grace, and I'm a wife and a mom, and I'm a lover of this community. So That's what brought us here.
Okay. Having worked with you over the past year or so, there's a level of passion that you have. What makes you so passionate about the work of organizing?
Well, again, that tug that God kept pulling on me with, that called me to serve God and God's people, was really a call to not just being a pastor, but also to the liberation of God's people. I guess my deepest understanding of my own religious experience is about liberation, and my deepest understanding of the God of the Bible is about liberation. And I think that when God calls us to serve the people, that we're really supposed to serve by helping to liberate people, by helping to give people a voice. And when I see people who previously had been silenced and had felt like they have no voice and no way to change their own situation, and I watch those people become empowered and band together and start changing systems and structures that have held them down for a long time, there is no greater joy and no greater reward. So it just fuels the passion to keep doing it even more.
Was there something in seminary that kind of led you to the thought that you would do something other than pastor a church?
Well, I think that idea started before seminary. I had always known that my call was something different than just simple, not that any of it is simple, but than just regular church ministry. I had always known that it was very deeply intertwined with serving the community and people's very basic needs for shelter and food and employment and education. And so we do that as a church. But we, as much as we understand that direct service is important, we also recognize that there are these systems and structures in place that keep people in poverty and living lives of sickness and just fragmented lives. And so for me, it's just an extension of that call. I did go to Eden Seminary in St. Louis, which is a school of the United Church of Christ, and is very much devoted to a view of God and the Bible and the world that leads us to social justice work. So it's sort of an extension of that education as well, I guess.
For those who may not understand the terminology social justice, what does that mean?
Well, to me, I think it means at its most basic sense that God has created every single individual in God's image, and that all of us have an inherent value and dignity that needs to be upheld. And the social systems that have been set up in this world, and particularly in this country, are not valuing the dignity of all people. And so social justice, to me, at its most basic, means to bring that viewpoint to the world in such a way that we start to honor all human beings that are in our midst, and that we honor them with real opportunity and real access to the things that some people have had all along.
Growing up in this community, let's say this community because, Jefferson City, Boonville, Fulton, all is one community for the most part. But growing up in this area, is there something or some point in your life that that you can reflect back on that kind of position or pointed you in the direction that you ultimately ended up?
I think there are many of those points. So when I think about the work that we've done on public transportation, I think about my own beginnings in life. And I was born to a single mom. I was the fifth of 5 kids, and we lived over in Fulton. And my mom worked a lot. She was a waitress at a truck stop. And so she worked long hours and wasn't able to be home a lot. And there was a point in time when she had kids in 2 or 3 different elementary and middle schools in Fulton, and had to send a cab to go pick up kids at each school and get them home. And the expense of that was just unbearable. And she found an opportunity, probably through a government program, to purchase a house in New Bloomfield. And she purchased the house that was right across the street from the school. It never occurred to me how smart that was until many years later when I asked her, how did we end up here? And she explained it to me. And, from the time that we moved there, my siblings and I relied heavily for our social influence on the school. It was one of those things where some people were in church every time the doors were open. Well, I was at school every time the doors were open, participating in sports and academic things and all kinds of different opportunities. And I recognized that had that influence not been there, so readily accessible, that my life could have gone in a whole bunch of different directions that might not have been so positive. And when I look at the community of Jefferson City and think about kids who live 2.5 miles away from the school and have to walk to school when the weather's bad, and it makes it difficult to get there and to do all of those extracurricular things that, in my opinion, sort of saved my life, that kept me going in a positive direction. I want everybody to be able to have those opportunities and not have to move right across the street from their school to be able to do it.
Speaking of your work in the area of transportation, tell us a little bit about how you happen to get involved in that.
Well, with the work that we do with Faith Voices for Jefferson City, we have been working for a while just to make sure that people have the opportunities that they need. So a couple of years ago, we did something called a listening campaign, where people went into the community and they had one-on-one conversations with just a whole bunch of different people and talked to people about what the issues were that were really causing them to struggle, and the issues that were keeping them up at night and causing them to not be able to live abundant lives, really. And medical care, transportation, accessibility to decent paying jobs with a living wage, all of those things continue to surface over and over again. And so we started to look at the public transportation system in Jefferson City and recognize the difficulty with the fact that it runs Monday through Friday from basically 6 o'clock in the morning to 5-something in the evening, which is not when people who are working low-wage jobs are generally going to work and coming home. Talking to people who say something as simple as, I rely on the bus 100% for my transportation, and I'd like to be able to do my laundry on Saturday at the laundromat if I want to. Or I'd like to be able to go out to a ball game on Friday night if I wanted to. and recognizing that not everybody has the same opportunities and that it's our responsibility as a community to make sure that all those opportunities are offered. So we found ourselves wanting to improve public transportation, but shortly into that process, what we also found was that we were in more of a defensive stance because we were facing actual cuts to the limited service that already existed. So we, together with a bunch of other groups in the community, formed a group called Citizens for JeffTran, and we've been working together for a couple of years to make sure that we can focus the city's resources on finding ways to make public transportation better for everybody, not just for the people who solely rely on it, but for anybody who might want to use it. And it really is a lifeline for people. And I think sometimes we see it as sort of just an extra service, but we need to see it as an essential service and a necessity for the folks in this community.
What is the status of that engagement?
Well, we've been working for, like I said, a couple of years on this. Last year in April or May, we requested that the city put in place a public transportation advisory committee. We do believe that we have a lot of resources in this community, a lot of smart and creative people who can help to find solutions that aren't going to cost a lot of money, but that are going to help us to provide better opportunities for people. And not a lot has been done. What we've heard for a long time is we have to get this convention center thing settled. And anyone who's been in Jefferson City for a while knows how long that's going to take and has taken so far. So we finally started to see some movement. We presented the idea again this year to the City Council in the form of a draft resolution, asking that that resolution be passed and that the committee be formed. And it has finally started to move. The city had a work session just a few weeks ago with all the City Council members, and we talked about the opportunities there. And one of the City Council members, Carlos Graham, said that he was going to be working with the city attorney to draft an ordinance to bring about this committee. So there are two different committees that are going to be hearing that ordinance within the next few weeks, and hopefully we'll be moving forward soon with a citizen and stakeholder-led committee to help advise the city in this process.
Well, very good. Appreciate your all's efforts in that, dealing with that very important issue. Let's shift a little bit here to speak a little bit about the issue relative to Medicaid expansion. That has been in the media for some time. Anyone who have not heard about it, they must have been on a rock. Tell us a little bit about the importance of Medicaid expansion and what your efforts have been to not only get the word out about the importance of the passage of Medicaid expansion, but also the impact that would have.
Mm-hmm. So the work that we've done around Medicaid expansion has been pretty expansive over the past couple of years. The faith community, Faith Voices, specifically believes that Medicaid expansion in the state of Missouri to 138% of the federal poverty level is a moral imperative and is what the state of Missouri needs to do, that it's the right thing and the smart thing to do. And so we've been talking to folks for quite some time, folks who find themselves in what they call the Medicaid gap, people who should have benefited from the Affordable Care Act but find themselves below the threshold to get those government subsidies and above the income level to get Medicaid. So there are so many people in that gap who did not benefit from the Affordable Care Act, and we see that as a moral failure of our state. So one of the things that we've been doing is contacting our legislators to let them know that the people of Missouri do want to see Medicaid expansion happen, that we're not willing to stand by while they play the games of partisan politics in the Capitol building, knowing that 750 people in the state of Missouri will die from one year to the next for lack of affordable medical care. We talk to people who find themselves in that gap. We gather their stories. We help them to know that they too can speak to their legislators
Now, what is that gap?
The Medicaid gap?
Yes.
So it's anyone who makes more than $294 a month, but less than 138% of the federal poverty level. So it's a huge gap.
Yeah.
So basically anyone who's working, but not making more than probably about $13 an hour would fall into that gap. So all kinds of families across the state of Missouri find themselves fallen into that gap. And not only does it affect their ability to get medical care, it affects their ability to live their lives in general. So someone who is not able to have access to affordable medical care then doesn't seek treatment when they need it, and they continue going to work sick because they can't afford to take off. In most cases, they're working a job without a living wage. They don't have any sick time to take off, and so they continue going to work. So our entire workforce is working sicker because they're working with other people who are sick. Those people then usually end up getting to a point where they're too sick to go to work and they lose their job. And it's just this cycle that just continues to spur off of different events that keeps people living these sick, unhealthy lives and unable to provide for themselves and their families.
As you have engaged the legislature, what have been some of their reasoning for not the passage of Medicaid expansion?
Well, most of the reasoning that I've heard have to do with economic impact. And I have to say that I don't really understand the reasoning that's been given. For all the information that I see and the numbers that I've seen, our state is turning their back on a whole lot of money that we should be receiving right now that would carry us many, many years into the future in this process of figuring out how we best provide medical coverage for the citizens of the state of Missouri. So I personally have been in a conversation with the legislator who said to me, well, we don't believe that the federal government's going to do what they say they're going to do. So we're not going to expand Medicaid because we don't believe that they're going to give us the money that they're supposed to. I don't think we can count that as a valid argument. I'm not sure where that has happened in the past, and it's certainly not happening in states that have expanded Medicaid right now. The other objection that I personally got from a legislator was, well, so 5 years down the road, if we can't continue this and we have to take it away from people, is that what you want? Is that what you want us to provide health care for people for 5 years and then take it away? And my response to that would be, do you understand the value of 5 years of medical care to a diabetic? 5 years of medical care to someone who's suffering with a terminal illness, or someone who's just suffering with fibromyalgia or lupus or something like that, that's just a constant drain on their lives. 5 years of medical care would be pretty incredible to those people.
Right.
And my guess is that we're pretty smart, and once we start doing the right thing and the smart thing, that we would be able to figure out how to continue it.
I guess one of the areas that I see is that it appears, as you talk with legislators, it appears as though they are waiting for someone else to step out and then they possibly can step behind them, rather than being that person that says, I'm going to step out because this is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would agree with that. I think what we see right now is very much this game of partisan politics and everybody jockeying for certain positions within their own caucus or their own party, where we don't see a lot of individual, I would say, boldness or individual, from the religious community, we would say prophetic witness, where the things that someone really campaigned on, those things that were really important to them, that they were really passionate about, somehow they get to a place where they forget all of those things for what seems like two reasons. One is they have to figure out what their next position is going to be and how they're going to get elected to it. And the other one is that there is so much influence from money coming in from different corporate interests to folks who are making our laws and making those decisions.
Let's shift now to another issue that has been very, very hot throughout this country. And unfortunately, it is also raising its head in our fair state of Missouri, and that is early voting. Tell us a little bit about your work in that area.
So we had an opportunity earlier this year to participate with a campaign to circulate an initiative petition for a constitutional amendment to bring early voting to the state of Missouri. I believe there are about 38 other states in the country that already do early voting. And in fact, when I came across people when we were doing signature gathering who were from other states, they couldn't believe that we didn't actually do early voting here in the state of Missouri. So what we find is that there are a lot of folks who have sort of checked out of the democratic process, that they don't vote anymore, some of them because they can't vote. I know that people who haven't ever had a problem voting have a hard time believing that someone else would have a problem voting. People like to say things like, well, I can make it to the polls, so everyone else can too. I think we have to realize that not everyone has the same kind of privileges that, for instance, you and I do, or other folks who are able to get to the polls. There are folks who I know who live in low-income communities who depend on the bus. For instance, someone who used to work under me in a company I used to work for would get on the bus in the morning. She would ride the bus to her child's daycare and drop the child off. She would get back on the bus, ride it to work. She couldn't leave during lunchtime because she had a half-hour lunch, and it takes at least 40 minutes to get anywhere on the bus in Jefferson City. Then she would leave work at about 5:30. She would take the bus to pick up her daughter, and by the time she got home, it would be about 7 o'clock. So that's one person with one job and one child who, for all practical intents and purposes, had no way of voting on Election Day. That's just one story. There are numerous other stories of people who work in, say, food service, and they work 2 different jobs where they go back to back. All kinds of different reasons that people can't or don't get to the polls. And we feel like the most important part of our democracy is the right and ability for everyone to be a part of that system where we make decisions. So we started circulating this petition so that we could bring early voting to the state of Missouri. The early voting petition would bring 6 weeks of early voting. The 3 weeks leading up to the election, there would be weekend voting. One of the things that polls and surveys have found around the country is that in places where they have started early voting and where they've provided weekend voting, that Sundays is one of the best days that we get turnout from communities that previously had been disenfranchised. So a lot of African American communities and Latina communities, they go to church, excuse me, and they think about their own call to be involved in their community. They think about the ways that God calls them to be involved and the ways that they should vote based on their own moral beliefs and their value system, and they go to the polls and they vote. And it would seem that there are probably some people in our society that just don't want everybody to vote. Some people will say that out loud, but most will not. I found it interesting when I was gathering signatures this spring for early voting that there were a few people who were actually willing to say to me, I can vote on Election Day and I don't want everyone to have the opportunity to vote. And the people who can't get there are the people that I don't want to vote. So I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Now there was a parallel piece of legislation that was put forward. Tell us a little bit about that.
There was. So in the wee hours of the night in the last week of the legislative session, a joint resolution was passed that was the legislature's own early voting measure. The early voting measure that was passed, it changed a couple times. My latest recollection of it is that it provides 6 days of early voting. And the early voting ends the Wednesday before the election. So there's a full week almost where people can't vote and that voting is not happening. So basically, on these 6 days, so people know that they have to know the exact right day to get there. And then once they get there, they can cast their vote. But what happens is, excuse me, there's there's this time period in which money really can still hold its powerful place in that week before. The other thing that measure does is it doesn't allow for any weekend voting. It specifically prohibits any weekend voting, especially Sundays, so that folks who would go to church and think about their civic responsibility in relationship to their faith and then go directly to the polls don't have those opportunities. So that folks who would need weekend hours to get there to be able to be included don't have the opportunity. There's also language in the resolution that directly targets the citizen-led effort. So it would seem that this was a direct attack on the part of the legislature on this citizen-led effort to bring early voting to the state of Missouri.
What are the responses that, as you canvass the Capitol, speaking to legislators, what was some of their responses to this initiative that the people were putting forward?
A lot of what I heard was some resentment to the fact that the people of Missouri might think that they needed to take action on their own part. In fact, I heard regular citizens out on the street say the same thing, that this is not our job, this is our legislators' job, and they need to do their job. Which brings me to think, what if our legislators aren't doing what we feel is their job? The idea that we, the people, have the opportunity to bring something to the ballot ourselves, I think is a pretty amazing opportunity. And I think it's also a pretty frightening opportunity to the folks who hold the power right now. So just to see that people are able to band together and in what is basically a grassroots effort, go out and talk to over 300,000 Missouri citizens who want to see a change, who are willing to sign their name on the line to make that happen. It shows that the people really do have some power and that they're willing to step out and claim it if necessary.
You know, I guess one of the areas that concerns me greatly, to hear people raise a concern about individuals stepping forward and taking responsibility for their own right. And to have someone to say this is the legislator's job, who put them there? You know, we put the legislators there, and they tell us that we are their boss. But then when we then ask them to do what we want them to do, they move to a different position. That, how dare you? That is frightening to think that individuals who citizens put in power forget how they got there, and then become their own boss, their own king makers, who can do what. That concerns me greatly. That also leads me to the next point here about not early voting, but payday lending. That same conversation came about as we were dealing with payday lending. Tell us a little bit about that.
So payday lending is not only an eyesore in the state of Missouri. When you drive down most any main road in any community, you see just shop upon shop of payday lenders, but also it's a drain on the most vulnerable communities in our state. So in any given year, the payday loan industry is extracting about $28 million from our poorest communities in Missouri. And these are communities that don't have $28 million to spare. There are story after story of folks who found themselves in a bad situation, whether it was because of a medical bill or some other unexpected car repair, whatever it was, that didn't have other options for traditional small dollar lending and took out a payday loan. So it might have been $300, it might have been $500. And in the end, there are folks who have lost their house, who have paid $30,000 in interest, lost their house and their car, and everything else of value to them. to pay back that $500 loan. And this is happening more and more in our poorest communities, and it needs to be stopped. So our government used to recognize that usury was a bad thing, that anything over a particular percentage rate was basically robbery and should not be allowed. And at some point we decided to deregulate all of that. And when we started seeing the pain that's being caused by payday lending, we went a long time ago and asked the legislature to do something about it and to put a cap back on it. And they did. They capped it at 1,950% APR, which to me is just an insult to the people of Missouri. The federal government has made a ruling to cap interest rates for military families at 36%. And we feel like if 36% is the limit for a military family, then 36% should be the limit for every family across the nation and certainly in the state of Missouri. So we've been asking for a 36% cap on payday loans for a long time. We circulated a petition back in 2012, got over, I think, 250,000 signatures from Missourians who wanted to see reform, and lost that battle in court by the people with the big money, which are the banks and the payday lenders. And so this year, there was a bill that got introduced in the Senate that was a payday reform bill. And I was the only person who went to testify against that bill in the House committee hearing. Everyone else there was in support of it. There were lobbyists there from the payday lending industry who, as it turned out, it appears, wrote most of the bill. I was attacked by those legislators, the ones who supposedly work for me. I was there as a pastor representing the people who I know and love and who are dealing with extreme pain from payday loans. And I was personally attacked and told that I needed to quit whining and that I needed to teach people personal responsibility and that this was a better option than somebody getting their legs broken in the back alley by Vito. And so we should just be happy with what we were being given. And we weren't happy with what we were being given. It capped interest rates at 900% APR. Which is still more than what the average payday loan is in Missouri, so it doesn't do anybody any good. It was supposed to have stopped rollover loans, but everybody knows who has any experience with payday lending that folks don't need to roll over their loan. They can get $500 from anybody as long as they're going to pay them back in 10 minutes. So they walk in, they pay off their loan, and they take it back out immediately and go give the money back to whoever it belonged to. Or they have multiple loans from multiple places. So this bill was really sort of a sham reform bill. And it was, in our opinion, put in place to make the people think that payday reform had happened so that everybody would kind of calm down and back off of it for a while. That wasn't okay with us, and it wasn't okay with Governor Nixon. So he just vetoed that bill, and we greatly appreciated it.
Thinking about the fact that you as a citizen would go before the legislature who are supposed to have a level of decorum, a level of respect that would, one, come down on someone who's speaking on behalf of the least of these the way that they did it's astounding. What did you think when that happened?
I was a little bit taken aback. So in the work that I do, I've sat in quite a few hearings, legislative hearings in the Capitol in the last couple of years. And in many cases, I've been embarrassed at the behavior and the lack of respect that happens in those rooms. As a homeschool parent, I've always thought I should take the kids to go see some of these hearings. And then there were times when I thought, boy, I'm glad my kids aren't here because there's no way I would want to explain this behavior to them. So for me to be there as a pastor and to receive that kind of treatment, I just felt was completely disrespectful and unacceptable in every way. It doesn't matter if I'm a pastor or a business owner or an unemployed person who came out of my neighborhood to go talk to my legislators. If I go and ask a question or give testimony in a time that is supposed to be a public comment time, then my public comment needs to be respected. What was even more telling at the payday hearing for that committee was that immediately after my testimony, they were hearing a bill that was also related to installment loans. There was a lobbyist there from the Online Lending Association. And when that lobbyist took his seat to answer all the questions about the bill, because the legislator who sponsored it didn't have any answers to the questions, he was treated with the utmost respect. It was very clear that the people in that room had considerable contact with him and knew who he was, and had probably received money from that particular lobby, and that's what caused respect to be given, rather than the fact that respect should have been given just because a citizen of the state of Missouri took the time to go and share their concerns.
As you share this story and other stories with individuals within the community, what kind of reaction or response do you get?
Usually anywhere from apathy to anger. So many people have decided that that's just how the system works, that they've just checked out. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to think about it because it feels like too big of a struggle to try to do anything about it. So for a lot of people, it's just apathy. People will say, I don't want to have anything to do with that. But there are people who get angry too. So when we're talking about early voting with folks in Jefferson City, and we come across people who say, I just don't vote. I don't think my vote matters. I don't think it counts. We can think about the fact that in Jefferson City, we've been fighting for better public transportation for about 2 years now, and that a lot of that fight has been trying to convince some city council people that our opinion matters, and then recognizing that city council people in Jefferson City are elected sometimes with only 300 votes. So now tell me that your vote doesn't count. Because you and 299 of your friends or family can elect someone who makes the rules that run this city. So when people recognize what's going on and start to sense a little bit of that kind of righteous indignation, that anger over what's going on, that's where organizing starts. People recognize that not only am I mad about this, but I have the right and the responsibility to do something about it.
How do you go about speaking to that individual who feel that they have been confronted with all kinds of roadblocks, poverty, transportation issues, lack of jobs, all of the problems that they deal with on a daily basis? How do you convince that person that the amount of time that they would spend getting involved to assist in solving their own problems are important?
Well, that's the question of the day. A big part of that is helping people to know that they're not alone in their struggle. So most of us, when we're struggling with that situation where we can't keep steady employment, we don't have transportation, we're struggling to feed our family, we tend to feel like we're alone in that struggle, that nobody else must be as bad off as we are. And the most basic thing that we can do is to start building relationships in our communities where people start to know each other, people start to understand one another's struggles, and people start to see their own struggle in someone else's lives. And then it doesn't feel like it's just one person fighting against their own struggle alone. It starts to feel like the power of people coming together where we really might be able to make a difference. If we each give a little bit of our time and we do it together in a way that's organized and in a way that's proven to get results, then it's worth it. And then we almost can't justify not giving our time to that. So for instance, last year there was some rallies that were going on around a living wage, and people in Columbia who were low-wage workers walked off the job to demonstrate their need for a living wage. And I heard a lot of people say things like, well, if they're so in such bad shape, then why aren't they at work? They need to be at work. And to recognize that we have to step outside of our reality sometimes to create a new reality. So that person could keep going to work, making $7.35 an hour every day for the next year and a half, or that person could step out a little bit and say, you know what, I'm going to try to make a difference in that right now. And if that results in the people protesting and demonstrating, helping the people making decisions to understand that that's not a living wage and that we need to raise the minimum wage, and 3 months down the road that person's making $10 an hour instead of $7.35, then it was worth the 8 hours that they didn't work that day. But we get so stuck in the places that we are that sometimes we can't see outside of it to step out and make a change.
And I guess one thing that that we've also come to see is that many times individuals who have come onto bad luck, so many times for no fault of their own, people sometimes look at them in a negative light. But not so long ago, they were looking at people in that same light. And so, it only takes the loss of a job. It only takes one major health issue for you to now be in poverty, for now you are in positions of standing in line to seek food when once you were donating food. Those type of issues, those type of individuals, and those type of situations occur every day. And many times those of us who have been blessed seem to forget from which we come. I know I didn't come from much when it comes to resources. And to be able to say that I have been blessed to the point where I can in fact assist someone, it's a feeling that you cannot believe. But how do you, and what do you say to those individuals that say, well, that person's they're driving up at the Samaritan Center in a nice car. If they have a nice car, they shouldn't be getting food. What do you tell those people? Because they're not thinking,
Right, and to some extent, you may not always be able to have those conversations. I have a policy in my life that I won't debate with anyone. So if we're not coming to a conversation where we're both willing to come out in a different place in the end, then we're not really going to have a conversation. Some people, you're not going to be able to change that idea. It's what they've heard from generations of people before them. It's what they hear on talk radio. It's what they hear in all these different sound bites, and they just repeat it. Probably those people are going to come to a point in their life where they're going to come to what I call a crisis of belief. Something is going to happen. It's going to be them or their kids or somebody who unfortunately falls on that same difficulty, and they may find themselves driving up in the Samaritan Center parking lot with their Cadillac. But starting to help people just open themselves up to knowing people's stories and to being in relationship with people, because so many people are in a situation where from month to month they may have enough this month and they may be the ones giving, and next month they may be the ones receiving. And that's really the place where we need to find ourselves in our society, where we're able to give and receive as needed, instead of feeling like we're always going to be the giver or we're always going to be the receiver and it's our job to judge the other. Just helping people to know the people that they're judging, so to speak, and to be in relationship with them. I'm in relationship with a lot of people who live below the poverty line, and I don't know any of them who want to be there. I don't know any of them who enjoy going to the food pantry and sitting in line and sometimes feeling like they're judged to get a couple bags of food that it's really hard to make anything out of. I don't know anybody who wants to go stand in line at the Family Support Division to get their temporary assistance or their food stamps. Nobody wants to be there. And I think we have to change this mindset in our society that people are there because they're lazy or because they choose to be, and we have to get to know the people because that immediately changes everything.
Okay. To prepare to wrap this up, why do you think it is important for faith leaders to step up and step out on what they profess, and not simply speak it from the pulpit, but walk it, talk it outside the church?
Well, I think that's a part of our call as people of faith, not just faith leaders, but any people of faith. So when we think about what religion is, it's sort of this system that helps us to understand how to navigate life in relationship to one another and in relationship to the institution of the church or the mosque or the synagogue or whatever it is, and in relationship to God. And all of that together is about how we live our lives. And most of us live our lives more outside of that hour that we're in our religious service together. You know, that's the place where kind of the rubber meets the road, is in our everyday life. And we can say and preach and sing and pray about all the good news that we want in church on Sunday. But if we don't live that good news the rest of our week, then everything that we did on Sunday is in vain. I think for a while we thought as pastors that it was just our job to lead people into this religious experience once a week. And it's really our job to lead people into a spiritual life that lives the good news every day of the week.
Okay. Well, thank you, Reverend, on your work in this community and your efforts to do the greater good. There are angels out there, and you're one of them.
Thank you.
We have been speaking with the Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman. She is an organizer with Faith Voices for Jefferson City, and she is also the pastor of Table of Grace Church here in Jefferson City. The last thing that I would say is this: if you are living, get involved. We'll see you next time. God bless.